Keir Starmer still wants you to know, just in case you had any shadow of a doubt, he's really, really not left-wing. He made this pitch to the Progressive Britain conference this weekend.
Some people think that all we're doing is distancing ourselves from the previous regime. Well, we are, but that misses the point. This is about taking our party back to where we belong and where we should have always been. Back doing what we were created to do. We've been drifting away from working people for a long time, and that's unforgivable. That's why I say this project goes further and deeper than New Labour's rewriting of Clause 4. This is about rolling up our sleeves, changing our entire culture. It's our DNA. Who are we in it for? Who do we serve? Who do we wake up in the morning and fight for? Who do we have in our mind's eye when we make decisions? And with the levels of cynicism in our politics, the letdown, the drifting away, the disconnect, our collapse in Scotland, the loss of the Red Wall, this task is going to be ongoing, difficult, and enormous. It is, if you like, Clause 4 on steroids.
Clause 4 on steroids. For anyone who's under 40, or I suppose didn't do a politics degree, Clause 4 is what Tony Blair rewrote when he became leader of the Labour Party. So I think around 1995. Clause 4 used to be the Labour Party being committed to public ownership, collective ownership. He changed that to something a bit more generic about believing in reducing inequality and social justice or whatever. It was a bit of a moment in 1994 or 1995. It's in the past and no one cares anymore, right? And especially, I mean, it's a strange line to be using now because, question time last week, let's say, we showed you clips of it on the show. What was everyone talking about and everyone was so angry about, right? It was privatized water companies and how the privatization of all of Britain's pride and joys, I don't know, was the water ever the pride and joy? I don't know. But British social infrastructure that was pretty goddamn important and didn't work too badly. Privatizing it all has been an absolute disaster. And now you've got Keir Starmer standing up and saying, what am I going to do? Privatization on steroids. Just very, very strange. Obviously, if you haven't heard of Progressive Britain, that's the rebrand of Progress. So Progress was the faction that was launched specifically to back Tony Blair. So yeah, all a little bit, I don't know, it's a bit Groundhog Day. Doesn't feel like he's really changed with the times. Let's go to one more clip from that speech. This was Starmer's most headline-grabbing line.
I don't think the language of stability comes naturally to progressive politics. I think too often we dismiss it as conservative, as a barrier to change. Now, don't mistake me, the very best of progressive politics is found in our determination to push Britain forward. A hunger, an ambition, that we can seize the opportunities of tomorrow and make them work for working people. But this ambition must never become unmoored from working people's need for stability, for order, for security. We must understand that there are precious things in our way of life, in our environment, in our communities, that it's our responsibility to protect and preserve, to pass on to future generations. And look, if that sounds conservative, then let me tell you, I don't care. Somebody has got to stand up for the things that make this country great. And it isn't going to be the Tories.
That was the most controversial line, I suppose, because he said, if you think I'm conservative, great. Now, I actually didn't mind that line. I thought it was kind of interesting because conservatism with a small c, there obviously is some value to it. People do value stability, security, and things not changing too much all the time. That's why it's, one of the reasons why it's an enduring political project. But it just seems so empty. And I suppose the reason I say that especially is this phrase, working people. Now, obviously, when you see that speech, this is not about working people versus people who don't work. What this is about is him pitching to a specific constituency who he thinks have abandoned the Labour Party and started voting Conservative. Now, these are people who potentially older, homeowners, and not that liberal. So maybe don't live in inner cities, right? And he's pitching to them. It's essentially a cultural group and he's making a cultural argument. But he's trying to make this about working people. Now, working people, working age people, right? They've voted Labour, I think, in every election for the last decade or so, right? So even in 2019, when Labour didn't do as well as we would have liked them to do, we got the majority, or Labour got the majority, of working age people. But it's suddenly working people means specifically this one small subset of people who happen to not like some of Labour's liberal values. Now, these are the real working people. Now, you can make an electoral argument that they are a group of people who it's very important to appeal to, but you can't disparage everyone who isn't them as not working people. You know, it's not serious analysis. And I think it is quite degrading to our culture, actually, because you're essentially making what makes someone a real working person is essentially being a small c conservative. There's nothing wrong with being a small c conservative, but that is not the only kind of working person we have in this country. And if we're being real, most working age people in this country are not particularly conservative. Following that speech, questions abounded about whether it was just another sign of Keir Starmer's fickleness. So now suddenly he's saying he's more conservative than the Conservatives, not what he sounded like a couple of years ago. Well, this was Shadow Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds speaking to Laura Kuenssberg.
When he won the leadership, he said he'd make the case for moral socialism. Yesterday, he said, I don't care if I sound like a conservative. Now, what do people want to make of that? That sounds like someone who'll say almost anything in order to be elected.
His reference. What Keir was asking is, what is it the Conservative Party actually conserves? Because it's not the NHS, it's not the BBC, it's not our waterways full of filthy sewage, it's not the nation, it's not family life. And he was pointing out that to meet the things, to celebrate the things, to defend the things that make this country great, it's the Labour agenda that will do that. And on Keir personally, I voted for Keir Starmer. I wanted someone who could be the Prime Minister and do it for the right reasons, be in public service for the right reasons. And he embodies that, and that hasn't changed. And I think simply taking, yes, the statement and values he had in that leadership contest, but recognising we've had things like the pandemic and that it's affected how much money there is to spend on public services.
Now, you've heard that answer before, very predictable. I don't find it particularly persuasive. It's the same Keir who stood in the leadership election. I mean, it's the same person, it's the same flesh and bones, but he's saying completely different things. He's dropped all of his pledges. Jonathan Reynolds also said, well, he's kept all the things I like. Well, that's not really what makes someone trustworthy. They do what I like, even if they break all their promises. As I say, he was out there to defend Keir Starmer. On not every channel did they actually need a shadow cabinet member to stand up for Keir, because sometimes their own journalists did it for him. This was Sky's political correspondent, Liz Bates, commenting on the speech.
I think where the Labour Party is at, and Keir Starmer is hardworking and methodical, and he saw where the Labour Party was at and where it needed to be. And what they did was they ditched all of that ideology that came with Jeremy Corbyn. He's moved the party into the centre ground because he knows that that is where political parties win general elections.
So they're less ideological now. He knows that you win elections in the centre ground. Now, that wasn't, a shadow minister for trains or whatever. That was a political correspondent for Sky News. They're supposed to be an impartial journalist who is essentially saying, Keir Starmer, he's brilliant because he's very sensible, very hardworking, and he's dropped all the ideology. Now, we've just shown you a clip of him saying that working people are conservatives. That's ideological, right? You might say it's necessary to win an election, but to sort of rephrase this as the people who said they wanted to transform the economy and make housing affordable, they were ideological. The guy who wants everything to stay the same but with some more ASBOs, he's unideological. That's a very ideological statement from Liz Bates there from Sky. And I'm not sure if she's aware of it. Does she know she's doing Keir Starmer's bidding, or is she so deep in this sort of ideological world that, of course, what Keir Starmer is saying is objectively sensible, objectively unideological? Because, I mean, you could say that's the definition of ideology, when what you're saying is incredibly ideological, but you make out as if it's just common sense. And obviously that common sense is being reproduced by Sky News, even when it wouldn't stand up to like the tiniest little bit of scrutiny. It's not what political journalism should be like, I'm sorry.